Marcia, the downturn driven by the ongoing trade war, signaling signs of a possible recession. After months of being assaulted by U.S. tariffs and battered by the ongoing trade war, Canada now showing major cracks in the armor.
Canada's economy, the pride of the North, is now staring at the grim possibility of a recession. The latest GDP report just landed, and the numbers are worse than almost everyone expected. 2 straight quarters of contraction, exports collapsing, and the auto industry in particular bleeding under the weight of U.S. tariffs. For Canada, the question isn't whether things are slowing down, it's whether the slowdown has already become a recession. The spotlight is firmly on Canada this time. In the second quarter of 2025, the country's GDP shrank 1.6% annualized, following a 2% drop in the first quarter. By the textbook definition, that's a recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. But economists are split. Some call it recession territory, while others say domestic resilience is cushioning the fall. The debate is less about whether the pain is real and more about whether Canada can climb back before it gets worse. The GDP report, released at the end of August 2025, shocked financial analysts and policymakers alike. A modest decline of 0.6% had been forecast by many economists. Instead, Canada delivered a sharper blow, almost 3 times deeper. Exports plunged 7.5%, led by passenger car and light truck shipments, which nosedived nearly 25%. For an economy tied so closely to the U.S. market, Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods were like a direct strike. Machinery shipments fell sharply too, and business investment in equipment dropped, a clear sign that companies are holding back until the dust settles.
You had exports collapsing 27% at an annualized rate in the quarter, and business spending on machinery and equipment plunged even more. Those are pandemic-like declines in activity. No mystery why. The tariffs on motor vehicles, steel, aluminum, those were the real weak spots for exports.
Now, zoom in to the timeline. April, May, June. 3 months, 3 consecutive declines of 0.1% each, pushing the entire quarter into contraction. That makes it the second quarter in a row of negative growth, with Q1 also hit after companies rushed to export goods before tariffs took effect. It was front-loading at first, an artificial boost, but once the tariffs kicked in fully, exports tumbled and GDP went with them. But here's the twist. Beneath the gloomy headline numbers, domestic demand is showing surprising strength. Household spending rose at an annualized pace of 4.5%, housing investment climbed more than 6%, and government spending added its own cushion. So while exports collapsed, Canadians themselves continued to spend. Analysts at Scotiabank and RBC both pointed to this split picture: weak trade, strong households. Derek Holt, head of capital markets at Scotiabank, even said there's no need to panic about rate cuts yet, since final domestic demand jumped 3.4% annualized. In other words, Canada isn't collapsing across the board. Exports are the main problem. Still, exports matter, and in Canada, they matter a lot. The auto sector is a critical driver of manufacturing jobs, supply chains, and GDP. Losing a quarter of shipments in one swoop is devastating. That's why some economists like Pedro Antunes of the Conference Board of Canada warn that the economy is already in recession territory. His words are stark. 2 quarters down, investment weak, exports crippled, Canada is walking on the edge. So why did this happen? The backdrop is the U.S. tariff war launched earlier this year. Trump's administration slapped heavy duties on steel, aluminum, autos, and other Canadian exports. Businesses scrambled in Q1 to push goods out before the tariffs hit, making those numbers look stronger than they really were. But once the tariffs took hold in Q2, the full effect was exposed. Machinery exports failed, autos plunged, and investment confidence evaporated. Add global uncertainties, slowing demand from Europe and Asia, and Canada was caught in a storm. Meanwhile, domestic resilience is not limitless. Yes, households are spending, but they are also dipping into savings. The household savings rate fell from 6% to 5%, evidence that Canadians are spending more than they're putting away. That can't last forever. At the same time, government support and housing activity helped buffer the blow. But if exports keep falling, that buffer may be overwhelmed. The impacts are being felt across the board. Business confidence has dipped with fewer investments in machinery and equipment. Manufacturers are scaling back production. Auto plants face uncertain futures. Financial markets now see a greater than 50% chance that the Bank of Canada will cut interest rates at its September 17th meeting, hoping to soften the blow. But there's a dilemma. Cut too soon and you risk fueling inflation. Wait too long and the economy might slide deeper into recession. Interestingly, not all analysts are pessimistic. RBC Economics noted that July GDP figures, an early estimate, showed a 0.1% rebound, suggesting the downturn may not persist. They argue that domestic demand remains strong enough to prevent a prolonged recession. Others agree, pointing out that Canada's fundamentals, low unemployment, steady consumer spending, resilient housing, are not consistent with a deep downturn. The problem is concentrated in exports, not across the entire economy. So, what does the future look like? In the short term, all eyes are on September's rate decision, the next jobs report, and inflation data. If domestic demand stays strong and exports rebound, Canada could escape with only a technical recession, a shallow dip, followed by recovery. But if exports remain crippled, investment confidence weakens further, and households can't keep spending, the recession could deepen. Analysts call this a two-track economy, households running hot, trade freezing cold. At the global level, Canada's contraction sends a warning. Trade wars don't just hurt one side, they destabilize entire supply chains. The U.S. economy itself may also feel the pinch as Canadian exports shrink, disrupting industries that depend on integrated North American production. Europe and Asia are watching closely as Canada seeks to pivot exports away from the US to new markets. So here we are, early September 2025. Canada is technically in a recession, exports gutted by tariffs, investment weak, but the domestic economy remains surprisingly resilient. Will consumer strength and government support hold the line, or will the drag from trade finally overwhelm them? That's the million-dollar question, and that's where you come in. What do you think? Can Canada ride out this storm with its domestic resilience, or are we heading for something much deeper? Should the Bank of Canada cut rates immediately, or wait and risk further slowdown? Drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more updates, and join the debate. Because Canada isn't just facing an economic report, it's facing a turning point.